thanks very much, Chandrachur. We have two people who've admirably kept to time. We had a third here. Unfortunately, they had visa problems, and they tried heroically to get their visas. Fauna Foreman apparently she was in San Diego, California. She was told that her visa was ready for her, but it was in San Francisco and wouldn't be able to get to her until it was too late. So she actually flew to San Francisco to the office and then was told, oh, sorry, we don't actually have it. So it was horrible. So they tried. But now we've got plenty of time for questions. We're supposed to go until 3:40. Maybe I'll let us out just a little bit earlier than that, but we'll go as long as there are still people who'd like to ask questions. So I'll open it to the floor.
I would like to make some comments on Mr. Chandrachur's observations. Now, when he talked about Gandhi, I was hoping that he would talk about you being not over-exploiting the resources, being frugal, being respectful to nature, trying to understand that nature has finite resources, which, if we were to follow the Western model, would destroy the earth and all diversity. I would wish that he think about these aspects. Mr. Gandhi's quotations, there are several beautiful quotations. The simplest one which I can recall immediately is, there is enough for people's need, but not enough for people's greed. Now, and there are many other quotations which talk about the finite resources of the earth, etc., being frugal, being not exploiting the earth. So I would request him to include some of these aspects also in the work that he's going to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take a couple more questions and then we'll have the answers.
My question for Chandrachur Singh ji. You mentioned Gandhiji, apprenticeship Siddhant, and I have an argument of you that basically apprenticeship failed in India. Even capitalist from India doesn't follow apprenticeship principle in India. And the rich and poor gap is very high in India itself. So how can you imagine the Western countries, those countries exploited by colonial means? Many of countries, developing countries today are facing any problem, poverty, hunger, disease, because of Western countries. They looted developing countries in the past. And how can we track them? This is very, very big gap. And we are not able to imagine how can we see the world as equal. And we see the world as everybody got justice. So Bangladesh, you've given a Bangladesh example. Many of African countries and many of Latin American countries, the world will in 2050. By 2050, the Earth will be in the hot conditions. Then environmental condition will be not in a good shape. Then how can when we follow the rule of power? So by make ourselves powerful country, developing country, itself make powerful country, then they have to sit on the table. Then they will be able to take the resources and grant from the Western countries. So I see that Western countries will not help you any kind. So Gandhiji, the principle of trusteeship is moral principle, in my view. So Western country will not help you. Anyway, thank you.
And one more, we have Daniel over here.
I also had a question for Chandrachur. I'm wondering what you think nonviolent resistance against climate change or against the human causes of climate change, what that might look like following in the spirit of Gandhi. Sure, is this thing on? Oh, it's a little better. Yeah, so I was just wondering what you think nonviolent resistance against climate change or against the human causes of climate change, or what that might look like in the spirit of Gandhi.
Okay, thank you for your comments and questions. To the first one, yes, I may have missed it while speaking about the thing that you mentioned. But if you remember the last slide, because I have it here, and one of the points in the last slide says that the Gandhian thinking provides a moral frame for grounding a global discourse on an alternative system of production and management of wealth, or a counter discourse to market fundamentalism. Now, perhaps I missed it out while speaking, but when I wrote this point, perhaps what I had in my mind was the kind of things that you are saying, and as I go along, I will definitely try and rope that into my thesis. As far as the second point is concerned, I quite don't agree that it failed in India. When was it implemented in India? If a theory has never been implemented in India, I don't understand how could it fail. And why I'm saying so, because the implementation of any Gandhian idea has preconditions. The implementation of an idea called trusteeship can come only after the satyagraha has taken place. A change of heart would be required. Now, this might sound very utopian. How can you have a change of heart? But there has been past, and their history is a proof of the fact that people have changed their heart, and that has led to a lot of different, different things in different consequences. That has had different consequences for society in general. So I don't understand, and I don't believe that it has ever failed. As far as why would West take it, the issue is if they don't, then perhaps they will have to understand that if the disastrous consequences are on the people of the South, then please understand these consequences also would mean that the resources that's in South would also go away. Please understand that 80% of the world's resources belongs to the South, generating only 20% of income. The 20% of the resources belongs to North, generates 80% of income. So it's not for the good of North or South, it's a good for all. And that is why the West should take it. Also, the whole idea of trusteeship in India would mean, if Gandhi gave that idea, he was well aware of the diversity in India. And if you look into the diversity that is there in the world, I think that trusteeship can find a resonance therein as well. As far as the third was concerned, yes, I do agree with you, and I do believe that non-violent satyagraha perhaps could create the momentum, at least, which could give a big push to a cosmopolitan thinking. And that is why I said that cosmopolitanism should open itself. Now, I'm not in a way saying that cosmopolitanism has not opened itself. Two of the latest writings that I came across by Lee Yippee and by Tony Eskin, they're already talking about it, rooted cosmopolitanism, embedded cosmopolitanism. So they are opening to it. All that I'm suggesting at this initial stage is include the dominant and the consistent non-Western values. That gives it more, applicability and more acceptance in these countries.
Thank you. No, we've had other hands first, Santos, sorry. Michael Duce, and then a gentleman in the middle here, and then we'll take Santos and Jay Drydick.
I'm sure you're aware of Kant's perpetual peace and the suggestion that there's a problem with primary acquisition of land. So to make your case even stronger, with which I fully agree, of course, why aren't you taking up this argument saying that the right of a political community to occupy a certain piece of land at the exclusion of others is already problematic and can only be mitigated by compensating maybe for, Kant argues for a right to visit, but maybe one could make this...
Can you hold it closer, please? We can't quite hear you.
Kant, on the basis of this limitation of the right to primary acquisition, argues for the right to visit the country. But maybe one could make this argument stronger as an argument for immigration or free movement worldwide.
Okay, and then we have the gentleman in the middle here.
I have a question to Chandrachur Singh. Slightly...
Sorry, can't hear you.
Slightly different from your perspective and your approach. So far my understanding goes, climate change and linked to human rights, and then when you look at solving the problem of climate change and its impacts, so you advocate the cosmopolitan approach. But I would like to know that while implementing the idea of cosmopolitanism, and you again take the help of institutions, international institutions, soft laws, but when implementation comes, then ultimately the responsibility comes to the nation state. And in some of the important decisions recently try to fix the legal responsibility on nation state to ensure the rights of the people vis-a-vis the disaster management, natural disaster or climate change. So how do you put the state and state legal responsibility in your cosmopolitan approach?
Thank you. Santos?
Kind of insightful presentation. It's not a question, it's a kind of observation, and what Mr. Chandrachur is experimenting with, bringing Gandhi into the kind of cosmopolitan moral framework, or even I'm experimenting with, I'm also trying to bring in Gandhi and Mandela into the designing of international institutions to eradicate poverty, particularly in the global south. I also share the same view. I don't know why most of the Indians, even not only Indians and people across the world, they're so pessimistic towards the idea of trusteeship council. So, what I personally feel, it's not that the trusteeship council was never experimented in India. If you just go to the history and correct your evidences, Acharya Vinoba Bhave was picked up as the first individual satyagrahi by Mahatma Gandhi ji, and that idea of trusteeship council was basically tried to actualize through the Bhudan Andolan. It's a kind of movement to distribute extra lands owned by the landlords or feudals. And it was not an utopian idea. When Vinoba Bhave tried in Telangana, one of the district of Telangana, Nalgonda district, one of the feudal, Ramchandra Reddy, who denoted 100 acres of land to the peasants. And this is my personal view, I take trusteeship council, resulting into, you say that, it can create a kind of robust political agency in, eradicating global poverty or, combating climate change. And I define this political act as, what I say about it is that it is a kind of self-conscious act of morally autonomous individual, you say guided by a certain kind of moral framework, with certain, you say, idea of a better global order. So, thanks, adding to what Mr. Chandrachur is doing.
Thank you. And then we have Jay Drydick. We'll have another round of questions after this. I already have 2 people on the list, so I'll put you third if you like.
I'll start with Mathew, and then I would invite Chandrachur also to respond. So Mathew's argument against a closed-door policy is based on fundamental interests. And it occurred to me, well, having a family and romantic relationships, that's not the only fundamental interest that we have. So how wide is the door going to open with this kind of argument? And in particular, I was thinking of how many millions are going to have their land washed from under their feet in Bangladesh by erosion and other effects of climate change. And in fact, people are talking about the possible policy of exporting population from Bangladesh to other places. So Mathew, and let me also point out, we recognize other fundamental interests like escaping persecution, therefore there are refugee rights. Do you think this would end up supporting a right of climate refugees? And that's a question for both of you.
Yeah, thank you both for these questions. So just to the first one, and this in some way foreshadows my response to the second, I do think that there is an interesting argument to be made from the kind of problematic nature of first acquisition of property to the right to enter territory, or the kind of non-excludability, right, of entry. But what I'm kind of interested in exploring here is what you can get out of a picture that isn't sympathetic to that kind of view, because that view is premised on the right of an outsider to enter, right? And you have all of these kind of liberal nationalist views that nonetheless are working within liberal theory, but give priority to the interests of members of society that will kind of deny that view. So this is kind of dialectically a strategy that I chose. Take that picture, that standard picture, which is partial to insiders, and see if you can wind up eroding it a bit, eroding at least the set of controls that they can implement on immigration. So I suppose that similarly to, so with the second question, the fundamental interests of persons, yeah, I think they do come into effect when you think about certainly persons being displaced by climate catastrophe. But those persons will presumably be non-members of the liberal democratic nation. So just insofar as I'm limiting the scope of my argument to the claims that members can make, one thing, there still might be internal considerations that to bring to bear. So when people have family members who are affected by these climate catastrophes, you might think that their claims are particularly strong. Not only do they want to bring these persons in, but these other persons are under a certain kind of threat. But just sticking with the internal perspective is kind of the strategy that I'm going with here. Thank you.
Okay, so to the first one, believe that everything should be done by the nation state. I mean, to that I will only respond by asking you, where is the nation and where is the state? If nation states or if states would have done it, I wouldn't have been talking what I'm talking. The solutions must have been found. There's too much of a lag behind science and the consensus in the scientific community in terms of the prospective damages and the political action required to tackle it. 1970, almost it was very clear that there would be a problem. The last IPCC report very clearly says that. The fact of the matter is, from the Berlin Mandate till the Warsaw Mandate, nothing has happened. Now, in the whole of this, the carbon content in the atmosphere has been doubling. So I'm not arguing that it's an end of the nation state. I'm not arguing that. What I'm saying is, if that has not happened, could there be a possible way of looking at it from that perspective? It doesn't mean either or, this or that. It simply says is there can be a possible alternative, and that can happen. In the past, that may have worked, that has worked worldwide. When people come together, it works. Social movements against globalization, there are examples of it, of how institutions can be designed to counter the exploitative situation in which we find ourselves. As far as Santos's comment is concerned, you see, the whole idea of Bhudan movement was a social movement. It was not institutionalized through the state. Yes, certain elements of trusteeship implicitly has come into the directive principles of the state policy. But, friend, you know that directive principles of state policy are not legally binding. And that is what makes me to say that, they have not been implemented in the way Gandhi had conceived them, or in the way Gandhi would have wanted them to be. I do agree with you that, yes, the Bhudan movement in a way brought it, but it was a short-lived experiment, just, didn't reach out to pan-India, and it covered only some states. The third one, there has been a significant rise in the number of climate refugees. Now, that is why I would argue that this whole problem requires an imminent answer. And then going back to the first comment itself, that if it's not being worked out through this straight route, then possibly the time to take an alternative route, because refugees will go up, even if they are, taken to some other place, that itself is coercive on them. Because if you take somebody out from the roots, and no matter how good a life you give it to the person on a different place, I don't think that would make the person happy. So rather than, looking into that, I think we need to focus our strategies to find an answer to it.
Okay, thank you. We've got Professor Ackerley, and then let's take one last big round of questions. So anyone who has a question, we'll get to. We'll definitely get to you. But Professor Ackerley first.
So briefly, are you sure that when you bring Gandhi in, you end up with cosmopolitanism? And are you sure that if this is what you want, that Gandhi's your best ally? So that's my short question. I'm going to ask it in a longer way. What if you turn that down and I go closer? Deal? Better? Okay. So I think you're flying too high, particularly with climate change. And that's not your fault. That's how climate change flies these days. But that's not how people live it. So when you turn to the carbon trading framework as an answer, that is a solution that is not either Gandhian or Gandhi-Shivian driven, right? That's really driven by the people who are causing the problem. But if you were to generate a solution driven by people who were surviving the problem, what would it look like? So if you look at, so let's just say a fund had been created. Right now, the World Bank and ADB, Asian Development Bank, even though they are also funding coal plants, are funding the re-embankment of the polar region in southwestern Bangladesh, which is already experiencing the climate change impacts that we're talking about. So they're already below sea level. So what about that re-empowerment? Who actually does that benefit? There are winners and losers in that. Just environmentally, the losers are anybody further upstream, because as the water comes in, instead of going out all over the embankment, it gets channeled. So storm surges are higher, further up, and are more likely to go over more embankments due to storms. So that solution, while people may ask for a higher embankment to protect them, the physics of it aren't really in support of the people who are experiencing that as a solution. But the World Bank is keen to support it. Why? Because it's a solution that also has an income-generating effect. But for whom? The income-generating effect is in the export shrimp market, and that doesn't benefit everybody. There's 1/10 of the employment in shrimp manufacturing growing than there is in agriculture. So when you look at what the actual implementation might look like, it doesn't look very good. There might be a great model somewhere. Let's look. Maybe, and we're not in my area of expertise, but maybe the more democratically oriented agricultural approach that Vandana Shiv has been arguing for is one that at least is a better starting point than to start from, let's accumulate huge quantities of funds and then use them as a reallocation. Because I think what we're looking at is that trying to allocate large amounts of funds to deal with these problems won't actually deal with the problems, because the people who are facing them are people who are closer to poverty, and they don't have the resources to spend huge amounts of money, but they do have the resources to adapt on their own if they had modest amounts of money to help them adapt. Does that make sense? So my question to you is, are you sure that if you bring in Gandhi, what you end up is cosmopolitanism, and are you sure that Gandhi's the right person to bring in if what you're trying to do is have a community base, that is, a perspective of people in poverty, for dealing with the impacts of climate change?
Okay, thank you. And we have, the person who was next in line is gone, so over here.
I don't know whether my query is related to your concerns or not. If it is not, you can bypass it. You are talking about green politics, so how can we actually think about politics without questioning anthropocentrism or without questioning the very tenets of Western rationalism or rationality, which actually gives birth to this anthropocentrism, the objectification of nature. So, and recently in Western philosophy also there has been various questioning about against this Western rationality, such as the theory and the philosophy of Deleuze and the neo-materialist thinkers such as Bruno Latour and Deleuze and others. They are questioning this Western rationality because of its inherent anthropocentrism, and they are talking about neo-materialism, giving matter its due. So thinking about matter as it is, like it has its own life. So there is this talk about being animal or being or talk about post-humanism kind of things. So when you talk about Gandhi and Gandhi's, can you actually or Gandhi's critique of this kind of plundering of Mother Earth. So can there be a dialogue between this neo-materialist thinkers and Gandhi's concerns? That's my point.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, was there the young person back there? Okay, you were just stretching. Right here, the professor?
Address to Chandrachur Singh. A very enlightening presentation indeed. But what I have in mind right now is you've included a lot of humanism in your obviously implicit in Gandhian philosophy. I'd like to know as to what kind of mechanism are you planning to adopt in order to bring this change in heart among the common people? That you, it's a very great idea indeed. So any means and mechanisms or methodology or the ways and means that you're thinking of implementing it? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I'll take a quick chairs question for Matt. If I understood you correctly, then family reunification would be strong grounds for being able to cross the border freely, but it doesn't seem like anybody who just decides to could go live in another country. It wouldn't be that full scale of free movement. And if that's correct, then I wonder why not. I wonder why we shouldn't let people move, assuming we could ever get the world to a situation like that, but why we shouldn't let people move to, from the United States to Mexico City if they want to go there because they love the dancing and they want to pursue educational opportunities, anything like that, from India to the United States. And I would simply point out that we already have that world for the elites. So if you, let's say, went to the finest schools and have parents with a little bit of money who were able to get you the qualifications, let's just say you're an academic, if you can crank out the publications and do all those things that universities love, you can go anywhere in the world. You can virtually write your own ticket. Yes? Anyone in this room could do that. But if you're not a person states want for their own selfish reasons, then your options are much more limited, and I wonder if that's a failure of justice and possibly a challenge that the theory should take up. Scott?
So it's more of a worry than a question, but maybe you can reassure me this isn't a controversial position. So you said that family members and romantic partners are an integral part of most people's well-being. Sorry, an integral part of most people's well-being.
Just start again. Sorry.
Okay. Right. So family members and romantic partners are meant to be an integral part of most people's well-being, you said. So the worry here is one of partiality, about what implications might come from that. And also I don't necessarily think it's true. I think what's valuable about family members and romantic partners is that it's a close relationship, and you can have close friends that would have similar sort of function in terms of your well-being. And this particularly came out when you used the baby on the doorstep analogy. You're saying that you find this baby and you've got an obligation to take it in, but you maybe don't have an obligation to make it part of your family. Well, maybe not, but maybe you have an obligation to have a close relationship with it, something like that. So if you can speak to that, that would be great.
Okay, we could probably take two more if anybody wants. Okay, so Chandrachur this time.
Okay, thank you for the questions, Bruce, Professor Bruce Ackerley. I never defended that fund. I mean, I don't know if this is the impression you got. I never defended that fund. What I was trying to argue was that for long we've been having a statist kind of a negotiation and diplomacy going on the issue. Is it time that we look to the alternative route? And could cosmopolitanism be one of them? Now, if yes, then out of that, I picked one model which Simon Canning has come up with. But that does not mean an endorsement of the model. In fact, I did a critique of it in terms of saying that this is a model, but this lacks all this. Now, as far as thinking that bringing Gandhi would solve it or sort it out, you know, my whole idea is bringing Gandhi helps us in two ways. One, it broadens cosmopolitanism, makes it more acceptable, or at least makes it appear as if it's a philosophy which has a universalistic acceptance and appeal, because it's drawing on different sources. Till date, I have not at least come across, there's a work by Farah Godrej, but not others, which do stress on, you know, the Indian philosophic thinking or the Chinese philosophic thinking. At least I have not come across. She might have done it, so I'll take it from her. But yes, what I'm saying is a cosmopolitan understanding which just not only is based on Kant, but also on others, is something which opens it up. That's from above. But from below, the moment you bring Gandhi in, then Gandhi has this whole alternative models of modernity, the whole alternative discourse to the way we consume. There's an alternative discourse to the symbiotic relationship that, you know, humans have with nature. So, you know, it's a strategic move in which you open it up in a globalized world, have a philosophy which is acceptable readily all over, and also what it contributes is, you know, if you accept it, then perhaps even in the Western world, you know, Gandhian understanding or all these focus on the way one should live in nature, with nature, would become much more acceptable. And that perhaps could create the kind of consensus required in terms of coming to the solution. And these are, as it is, I told you, it's an initial stage of my research. So how that happens and how that explodes, perhaps maybe later. I really didn't understand what you said. I mean, I'm sorry for it, but I never said that I don't assume at least that anthropocentrism and Western rationality are synonymous with each other. I mean, for heaven's sake, don't think that way. And we, in a way, have a tendency that, you know, in the West means individuality, West means materialism. No. West also has a very alternative way of thinking about it. Remember, Gandhi derives his ideas from the West. A major part of his ideas are from West. The other West, which you may call it. So perhaps I couldn't understand what you said. We can talk about that later. How the mechanism, a difficult one, but you see, if I go by what Gandhi would argue, what he meant by Swaraj, then remember, Swaraj and Satyagraha are very, you know, closely related to each other. So perhaps it's the reform of the self. If the self is reformed and the soul is purified, then perhaps the mind becomes open to thinking about the other. Now, how that is put into practice is something that I can't talk about right now, but this is what I have in my mind. Thank you.
Thank you both for these great questions. So, yeah, so to the first question. So, personally, I would just avow that, yeah, I'm in favor of free movement, but there are certainly a lot of people out there, I guess, who aren't and who take this kind of liberal nationalist position on immigration. And insofar as we can get closer to more people being free to move to the societies that they want to by kind of undermining this position from within, I think that that's a good, it's at least an argumentative strategy that I think should be put out there and explored. And your second point kind of raises another kind of Trojan horse that we can introduce into the discussion, because it seems like what you said was that, okay, not only is it easier if you're rich to travel to another country, but the other side of that coin is that it's easier to support and bring in family members, and that would constitute potentially an inequality among members of a society that was unjust. So within the terms of my argument, I like that as a potential suggestion. So a domestic injustice is ongoing when some people are more able to bring in persons whom they really value being able to live with as opposed to others. So thank you for that. And then to the last question, so I do mention that the family relationships and marriage in particular that are kind of singled out as special, especially by my own native country's immigration regime, are not, in my view, morally exclusive in the sense of being the only important relationships. So I do think, just in terms of close romantic relationships, that there should be provisions for people who, for instance, reject the institution of marriage, but who have everything that looks like the same kind of really mature and important romantic relationship. To your point about friendship, I do think that certain kinds of friendships or even partnerships that involve long-term projects could provide important grounds for the right to bring other persons in, and that would be a kind of domestic argument. So that part of the paper is kind of alluded to, but I do appreciate the push to kind of develop it more. Thanks for that.
Okay, thank you very much. And just in case anyone in the room is wondering, Chandrachur doesn't talk about Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar, because that is my global justice guru, so he's not allowed. Thank you all so much for your excellent questions. This has been a great panel. Please join me in thanking our panelists.